What makes a 35-year-old man target a 16-year-old girl on a dating app? How does a missing piece of jewelry escalate to torture and murder? And why didn't anyone notice when Miranda Corsette, a teenage mother with a history of running away, fell into the hands of a calculated predator? These questions lie at the heart of one of 2025's most disturbing crimes. A case that exposes the dangerous intersection of vulnerable youth, digital platforms, and predatory behavior. Tonight, we reconstruct the last days of Miranda Corsette through police reports, witness statements, and digital forensics, revealing how Steven Gress and Michelle Brandis lured, trapped, and ultimately killed a young woman whose troubled past made her disappearance seem, at first, like just another runaway case. Welcome to Vic's True Crime Stories, where we shine light on the stories that society would rather forget. We've dedicated ourselves to giving victims a voice when others have silenced them. Tonight's episode examines the fragility of safety in our digital world through the tragic story of a girl who simply wanted connection. Behind the headlines of a missing teenager lay a life shadowed by loss and isolation. Miranda Corsette's path toward vulnerability began with the death of both her parents, a devastating event that fractured her sense of security and left emotional wounds that never properly healed. These early traumas created the foundation for a life marked by instability, a young girl searching for connection in a world that had already taken too much from her. She just didn't come back in a timely manner this time, Commander Mary Farrand of the Gulfport Police Department explained, revealing how Miranda's pattern of running away had become normalized to the point where her absence barely registered as unusual. Her grandmother, who became her guardian following her parents' deaths, had grown accustomed to Miranda's disappearances, sometimes lasting days or weeks. This tragic misinterpretation of warning signs, seeing desperate escape attempts as mere teenage rebellion, meant that crucial intervention opportunities were missed time and again. Miranda's mental health struggles intensified in the shadow of her grief. Substance abuse became both symptom and self-medication, a temporary escape from emotional pain that only deepened her vulnerability. These issues, which demanded professional intervention, were instead viewed through the lens of problem behavior rather than as desperate cries for help from a young woman drowning in circumstances beyond her control. The decision to homeschool Miranda, perhaps made with protective intentions, inadvertently removed her from vital peer connections and the watchful eyes of teachers who might have recognized her spiral. Each school day spent in isolation further limited her access to the support systems that typically serve as safety nets for troubled teens. Without these daily interactions, Miranda's world grew smaller, her dependency on digital connections more profound. In this diminished reality, her smartphone wasn't merely a device. It became her primary window to human connection. The digital world offered Miranda what her real life couldn't: attention, validation, and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted. Online, she could temporarily escape the overwhelming responsibilities that had been thrust upon her at such a young age. When Steven Gress's messages first appeared on her screen, they didn't trigger alarm bells. Instead, they filled a void that had been growing since her parents' deaths. His words provided the validation she desperately sought, making her feel valued in ways that her fragmented support system couldn't match. Experts in adolescent psychology point to this exact vulnerability. Teens with trauma histories are particularly susceptible to manipulation because their need for connection overwhelms their natural caution. She perceived him not as a predator but as someone who valued her, one investigator later noted, highlighting the cruel effectiveness of Gress's manipulation. For Miranda, his messages weren't red flags but lifelines, each notification a momentary respite from the loneliness that had become her constant companion. The digital relationship progressed with calculated precision. Gress recognized in Miranda what predators have long identified in vulnerable youth: the perfect victim, isolated, emotionally fragile, and desperate for connection. Their online exchanges created an illusion of understanding and acceptance that Miranda had long been denied in her real-world interactions. What made this case particularly heartbreaking was how predictable it was to experts who study online predation. Miranda's profile matched every vulnerability factor: family disruption, history of trauma, substance issues, limited supervision, and social isolation. The warning signs were there, flashing like emergency beacons, but without proper intervention, they merely became stepping stones toward tragedy. As Valentine's Day 2025 approached, Miranda wasn't just a teenager making a reckless decision to meet a stranger. She was a young woman whose entire life experience had systematically dismantled her protective instincts. Her troubled past hadn't simply influenced her choices. It had essentially mapped the route that led her directly into Gress's carefully constructed trap. The roadmap that led Miranda into Gress's trap was paved with her vulnerabilities, but what awaited at the destination exceeded the boundaries of comprehensible human cruelty. What began as a Valentine's Day pickup, a seemingly ordinary date, would spiral into a 9-day ordeal where the line between houseguest and hostage blurred until it vanished entirely, along with any chance of Miranda's escape. February 14, 2025, Steven Gress arrived at Miranda's home. Their first encounter had all the ordinary markings of a date, two people meeting after connecting online. Nothing outwardly suggested the calculated manipulation already in motion. Miranda returned home that night, a detail that would later confound investigators trying to piece together how the situation deteriorated so rapidly. The fact that she went back to Gress's house voluntarily the very next day revealed his chilling effectiveness at establishing false trust in just one interaction. From February 15 onward, the duplex Gress shared with his partner, 37-year-old Michelle Brandis, became Miranda's prison, though she wouldn't have recognized it as such immediately. For 5 days, she remained there, her connections to the outside world gradually severing as the couple's influence over her intensified. This phase of isolation, creating a bubble where only their reality existed, is a textbook step in predatory behavior that primes victims for later abuse. The facade of hospitality collapsed on February 20th. What might seem trivial in normal circumstances, a piece of missing jewelry, became the catalyst for unleashing the couple's latent violence. The accusation transformed the atmosphere instantly. Miranda, already cut off from support systems and surrounded by two adults, found herself trapped in an escalating nightmare with no witnesses and no way out. What followed defies easy description. For 4 horrific days, Miranda endured a systematic campaign of beatings and torture at the hands of both Gress and Brandis. The missing jewelry served merely as a pretense. The violence itself was the point. Predators often manufacture justifications for their cruelty, creating reasons that allow them to frame their victims as deserving of punishment rather than acknowledging their own sadistic impulses. Investigators would later determine that Miranda's suffering ended sometime between February 20th and February 24th. The manner of her death revealed the depths of her tormentor's depravity. Miranda was suffocated when a billiard ball was forced into her mouth and her face was wrapped in plastic, a method that ensured she experienced maximum terror and suffering in her final moments. The deliberate nature of this act suggests not a crime of passion or momentary loss of control, but a calculated decision to end a human life in the most dramatic way possible. Death marked only the beginning of the indignities visited upon Miranda's remains. Gress transported her body to a home in Largo, Florida, belonging to Brandis' mother. The selection of this secondary location demonstrates the premeditated nature of their actions. They needed somewhere to commit the next unspeakable act away from their own residence. Physical evidence later recovered would confirm that this was where Miranda's body was dismembered, a process requiring time, tools, and a profound disconnection from human empathy. The final violation came when Gress drove to Hillsborough County with Miranda's remains. There, he disposed of what remained of the 16-year-old mother in a dumpster, the ultimate statement of how he viewed her worth. This casual discarding of a human being as common trash reveals the complete dehumanization that had occurred in Gress's mind, allowing him to commit acts most people cannot even contemplate. As Gress and Brandis were covering up their crimes, Miranda's absence was only beginning to register as concerning. Her grandmother, accustomed to temporary disappearances, reported her missing on February 24, 2025, the same day police believed Miranda's remains were being discarded in a distant dumpster. The investigation began with standard missing person protocols, but accelerated dramatically when a witness came forward with information about the circumstances surrounding her death. By the time authorities pieced together the timeline, Gress was already in custody on unrelated charges. He was subsequently charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. Brandis turned herself in shortly after the investigation began, adding another layer to the already complex case of how two adults could collaborate in such extraordinary brutality against a teenage girl. The brutal ending of Miranda Corsette's life isn't just another crime statistic. It's a devastating warning that echoes across countless homes. Statistics reveal that 1 in 5 teenagers experience online harassment, with many falling victim through dating apps each year. These platforms, designed to connect people, too often become hunting grounds for predators seeking vulnerable targets. Miranda's story reminds us that digital danger doesn't announce itself with warning signs. It whispers through carefully crafted messages, builds false trust, and exploits the deepest human need for connection. The infant left behind, not even a year old, becomes the silent witness to a tragedy that rippled outward from a single online interaction, now forced to grow up without knowing their mother's face or voice. For parents watching this, please remember, your child's digital life is as real as their physical one. The boundary between teenage rebellion and genuine danger is razor thin. If this story moved you, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. How do we better protect vulnerable young people in an increasingly connected world? Your voice matters in this conversation. Tap the bell. Stay a while. Because on Vic's True Crime Stories, the endings aren't endings. They're doors. And we've got plenty left to open.